Marginalia was a project lasting more than 4 years, so it's a long story. A story of correspondence and collaboration, a story of building intentional relationship across great distance and across time. It was as much about the construction of this relation, of complicity and affection, as it was about exploring the challenges of living and working in the margins. It's a story about building discourse. Discourse as a place to connect, as well as a way to connect. It was a long performance, a daily practice, a way to do something rather than just show something. Using email and old ways of making, we opened up this conversation to see what would happen and to examine our life in the margins. Using reclaimed scraps of fabric, bits of clothing, and an endless range of other materials, including language. Each day we made a square to share our lives, to get acquainted, and to step, one foot at a time, a little closer. The squares became like diaries, like journals for each of us, and like postcards or letters between us. Like a soft book of days, these memory cloths served us both, alone and together. We discovered after not too long that the squares were exploring many of the same preoccupations. We're speaking about place and location in small and specific ways and in large and very general ones. Both of us were deeply connected to the work of women. We shared quotidian details of domestic life, of daily labor. We reflected on the work of the hand, the work of the body, the work of women, and the work taken up and sometimes laid down by culture. Both coastal and rural, located in fishing cultures, we reflected on the state of our fisheries. We were both over 50, and we reflected on aging, with all its blessings and all its burdens. Both mothers with daughters and daughters with mothers, both sexual, both gendered, and both struggling and juggling art and life, love and livelihood, freedom and responsibility. We made squares to share each day until it became a habit, a history between us. Day by day, month by month, until enough time passed and we realized we were building an archive of experience that might be shared beyond just we two. And so we went public in 2005 with our first performance action at Art Gallery in Vancouver as part of their live Biennale of Performance Art. We wallpapered the gallery with our material correspondence and performed our virtual one, reading and tearing up all our emails and leaving it as part of the collected residue of a year-long conversation. One, as it happened, that was not finished. And so we kept on going for 4 years and almost 3,000 squares between us. That story of the collaboration, of the continuing exchange between the west of Margaret and the east of Pam, the we of Marginalia, is well told in other places. But the story of consequence, of impact, and ongoing influence for each of us, that story has not been told. So I will begin it here, a story of what this working together has enabled for me, and where it's led in my own life and in my own practice. It's rare to have the time to reflect on one's life every day. Marginalia provided me with that gift and with that obligation. It delivered me to daily practice, to the commitment of a steady and deep paying attention. These long conversations with Margaret also invited me to reflect on art, its histories and its consequences, its processes, its strategies, and the impulse that operate most centrally in my work. Whether social, political, or personal, whether preoccupied by language and all its contradictions, or by meaning and all its discontents. Marginalia delivered me the time and space to dream and dissect. It offered me the dialogue in which to consider new territories to explore and new projects to pursue. This daily practice of material thinking, of reflecting from within the everyday, kept me awake to the power of materials and objects, but also to the power of dialogue itself. In the squaring and the sharing, I became more aware of what I might work with, of what I might work about, of how I might work, and indeed of who I might work for. And as the years unfolded, we both continued wondering about this notion of home, of how we find it, or claim it, or build it in one place, or perhaps in many places. Reflecting on what home feels like, on what belonging might be. Reflecting on where we are located and what ties us there. Always surrounded by the inevitable politics of nation and location. Within a world much bigger and much more complex than just the human. And in those 4 years of paying attention every day, I learned important lessons that were transformative. Lessons that were not just important to an art project, but to a life project, one more deeply aware of multiple histories, of the nature and complexities of love, and of the complex and sometimes confusing nature of community, where being both alone and together are necessary in life and in work. As our square making came to a close, it seemed clear that what we had been doing was building not just a room of our own, but a place for us both, a shelter, a meeting place, a common ground, a house. So I dreamed a house built from history and holding it at the same time, a shelter and an archive constructed from long and loving labor. A house that suited both Margaret and I, designed to be flexible, versatile, nomadic, mobile, unfixed to any single ground. And so we built a history house for each of us and surrounded them with our entire 4-year conversation, so gallery audiences might experience what could be constructed from an intention to relate, a commitment to connect. Each one an archive of individual histories, but speaking alone and together within a context of collaboration and conversation. And though we finished making squares, we were not finished with each other. So in 2008, we continued our research together. In Sackville, exploring the call and response of the conversations in real time, making meaning out of new relationships and evolving proximities, and exploring movement and gesture as shifting elements in live encounter. And in Montreal, reconstructing the houses as a long passageway in 2010, opening conversations in a corridor. We made a space to travel through this long and labored and loving project. And like that hallway, we left the conversation as we found it, resolutely open at both ends.